Hi, I'm David Colodney, and I get the privilege to speak with Jennifer Maritza McCauley. She'll be appearing at the Miami Book Fair, and we get a chance to speak with her in advance of that. And then you all will get a chance to actually see her in person. So, Jennifer, thanks for joining us. And how are you?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm doing really, really well. I love your
Good.
journey too, so it's really cool to be here. So
Right. Good. Excellent. Thank you so much. Um, I'd like to start, by asking you to read a poem from your new book. The new book is called Kinds of Grace. And could you please read name?
yeah, absolutely. And this is a poem that is kind of self-explanatory. Uh, name. I didn't come out of the womb knowing my name, but I have it stitched like peeling scar on my body, and damn it, I take it in me as my own. The first name, full-throated and multisyllabic. The second, Puerto Rican, stamped on me after my prima, who paints bursting flowers and swelling shores. Rosa Parks's maiden name is my last one. It's stone heavy with whiteness and ownership, but that special woman shares it too. So this last name I claim as my own in my blackness. I am a black woman stomping and stepping in this name. I am a Puerto Rican woman salsa shimmying in this name. I shout soliloquies in this name. I weep laments in this name. I tear my hair out in this name, and I come back from the aging depths in this name. This name is made of bubbling slave blood. This name is made of Guayana coqui skin and chitlins. This name sounds like a sweet dirge on a Sunday morning. This name hollers like the scream you can't keep in. I am this name, and I don't give a damn if you remember it. Look here. I write the words that come to me softly in the violet night air, and I'll whisper love to you in the song my mother gave me as a child, and that's how I'll go about this life in this name.
Fantastic. Thank you. Such a great poem. So there's this line in the poem. It's in the third stanza. Rosa Parks' maiden name is my last one. Could you kind of go into that and explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so actually, on my father's side, my great 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 grand cousin is actually Rosa Parks. Um, yes, and her maiden name is McCauley, and that's something that was kind of family lore. And then the more we looked into it, it ended up being true. My grandmother knew about her and everything. So I think that that's when I was growing up, I wasn't a fan of the last name McCauley. Um, but I remember I did a project as a kid, and you had to find a hero that you really looked up to, and I thought Rosa Parks. And then I found out her last name is McCauley. I'm like, My name? Yeah, I'm just some weird kid. Like we have to share the same last name. That's crazy. Um, so I looked into it and I asked my grandmother, and we ended up finding out that we had that connection. I felt more empowered in that last name, and I felt close to it again. So
So you stumbled on this almost by accident.
yeah, it was absolutely by accident. Yeah.
So does that make you appreciate? You said you weren't a fan of the name Macaulay. Like, does that make you appreciate that more, knowing this connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that I think that I was trying to harness in that poem where it was supposed to be kind of a reclamation. So I was reclaiming, the Macaulay, it's a Scots-Irish name. We know kind of the history that it was probably connected to our families enslavers, and things like that. So we still have that sort of tenuous connection, but then finding out that it was also Rosa Parks's last name, gave it this even new weight and power. So it's kind of taking that name back a little bit. So absolutely, yeah.
That- yeah. So, like, knowing this connection to Rosa Parks and what she means to, American history. I mean, do you find that that empowers some of your writing at all?
Oh,
Especially,
absolutely. 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 I think just having, folks who have done wonderful things, empowering things, I think just makes you want to become a better person, a better writer, a better, student of the world. So absolutely. I think this invigorates all of my writing for sure.
there's there's some beautiful artwork in this book, and it's not often that you come across a poetry collection that has paintings and artwork that's kind of mixed into the book. And one of the people, one of the artists that's in the book is Carol Ward,
Mhm.
and you feature some of her artwork, and there's actually a poem called Carol Ward in the
Yeah.
book. Could
Yeah.
you tell me something about Carol? Like what is your relationship with her? And
Yeah, so she's actually my mother-in-law. So yeah, so she had an incredible impact on me. So I thought that in a book that features wedding day or features, a really important central relationship, that even having that sort of connection was important to me. And also because she independently as a woman is just a person I admire. And I admire her as an artist as well. So that's why I wanted
Mhm.
to include her in kind of this sort of new type of familial legacy, I think.
Yeah. No, it adds a different element to the book too. It's like it kind of the the artwork just seems to kind of bring out some of the poems more in a way, and it's like it's almost like having, I don't know, like a two-dimensional kind of experience, not just the words on the page, but these beautiful paintings that go along with it.
I love
And
that. I love how you put that. That was great.
thank you. Um, Maritza Gonzalez Cintron is another artist whose work is in the book. What is your connection with her?
Yeah, again, creating this sort of kind of familial book. That is my cousin, and my middle name Maritza is comes from her, so I was named after her. She's a wonderful artist. She's an activist. She's an incredibly strong and powerful person that I really look up to. So I love having her as part of my legacy. And one day I just Facebooked her and I was like, hey, would you like to do the art for my book? And she was so excited and she was so kind about it. And um, she contributed some of her art and we talked about it and we got to pick the paintings that kind of worked the best with the poems. And I was really fortunate to be able to work with her. Yeah. So she's my
Great.
cousin.
That's great. Um, at what point, as you were working on this manuscript, did you decide I'm going to use artwork?
Yeah, it was much, much later on in the construction of manuscript. I think it was pretty much done. Um, And it was almost, I was already working with Flower Song to kind of get it out there. And then at the very end, I thought, there's something that I want to have more of a familial connection, and I want this to kind of mean something even more to me personally, and even to my family as well. So I I talked to Carol and Maritza, and they said yes. So it was a little bit later down the line. It wasn't, I did not envision it that way. Um,
How did Flower Song react when you
They were
sprang?
I emailed them and I was afraid that they were going to say no. I was afraid that they were going to be like, we can't, do it in color and all this, but they were great. They're like, we can do it. So, just put them in there. So
That's great. No, that's great. You talked about the family connections in this book, um and these additional family connections that you have with the artists. There's, I guess it kind of goes along with what one of my feelings about the book is that, and also reading your first book, it seems like the second book is more the speakers in the poems are more inwardly aware, I think, than they
yeah.
were in the first book. And in the first book, there was a lot of external, environmental things, and here it's very, I think, much more internalized. And there's some fantastic examples. I could ask you to read every poem in this book and get an example, but could you share an example? I wanted to point out was Isolation Room. Could you please read that poem?
Yeah, and before I read that, oh my gosh, I love that you said that because you captured exactly what I was hoping to do with both books. So the first book was to kind of reach outward and show kind of a community in peril, and then have a speaker that was kind of floating amongst that.
Mhm.
And then the second book was kind of the speaker going inward and
Mhm.
kind of examining what that impact of all of the things that, had happened in the first book, um, how that impacted that speaker later on in their life. But anyways, so thank you so much for saying that. So I was just like, oh yes, that's exactly what I was trying to do. But yes, I will read Isolation Room for sure. Okay. And I have never read this poem out loud, so this is gonna be this is gonna be
Oh,
an experience. This is great.
awesome.
Isolation Room. When doing EMDR, the therapist tells you to go back to the isolation room, the place in the psychiatric ward where you have become too wild-mouthed and beastly to be loved like a warm, laughing human, when you must sit on a prison bed and think about your own black face without window or neighboring flesh. You remember this place, how you sat on that prison bed and wailed loud, how you discovered that you had the ability to bargain fierce, that you'd give up your life if you could see the flash of another wriggling body, if you could feel untethered air blasting from the punched-in AC. You remember how you banged on the door and hollered, "I'll do anything, anything, just let me out." At that point, you would do it. Anything, whatever they asked, no matter how terrible. You didn't want to be animal. You didn't want to be left alone, confined to your own skin. You bet your life on an eyelash length of hope, and in that blackening place, you slapped the floor hard. There, you found it, the rock bottom. You were once a person who would read poems on long stages to audiences smothered with love, who studied Derrida and Morrison in PhD classes, and damn it, you earned that doctorate, but you still ended up here. You were in your own clothes at least. So you clutched them to your breast and told yourself, at least I have this, my own shirt and my own breath that whines and fumes out of my tired lips and reminds me, I have this life. I have this life. And look here, I'm alone, but I'm still huffing and puffing like Angel. Look here, I'm still alive. The therapist wants you to go back to this place. And when you do, your head fills with maelstrom and you can't see her face on Zoom. You wilt and you hear her saying, "Come back to me. Come on, come back." When you return, you see the reality that you are yourself in your own clothes, that you picked yourself, and she is as she is, staring at you, wondering about the next moment. You realize you are exactly where you were, in the isolation room, breathing big in your own black skin. You are the same as you were always back then. Alive, alive, alive.
Wow. I never would have guessed that was the first time you read that poem out loud.
Yeah. Yeah, I always skip it. So
Well, I found
like
this.
I'm gonna lead with that one next time and be like, this is the first one, y'all.
That sounds good. So one of the things that strikes me about this poem, and it's so, specific in the things that it's describing, and it's difficult. I mean, it's obviously a difficult subject for the speaker to talk about. And yet, after all this, it ends with alive three times. Like it was just this affirmation. Like, why did you decide to take it in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, something that I learned, when I was at my rock bottom, was that, I think that often in the world we're taught to kind of keep grinding, to keep going forward, and to not take that time and actually take care of yourself. And that was something that I didn't do. And I realized, and I kind of learned that the hard way. Um, but what I ended up realizing was that what kind of mattered the most is that I was just alive, that I was okay to just be. Sometimes we feel like we have to be something or we have to do something or we have to, be something to everyone, but sometimes you're worthy and valuable and it's okay to just be. So I think that that was the kind of revelation that I came to at the end, that it was enough to just be alive, you know. And I think that was kind of cleansing to me. So that's why that poem kind of reflected that, because that was kind of my conclusion from it.
Yeah, and it's quite, it's quite a conclusion to come to. It's like to just, you know, realize that being alive is good enough is pretty significant, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, there's I guess some of the other, I mean, some of the other things that I thought about the sequencing in this book a lot. And actually, after I guess I was playing with the table of contents, I was like kind of looking at it, and I realized there's a poem called 4 Days Before Marriage, and then there's another poem called 3 days before marriage. And I'm thinking to myself, like, why aren't they right next to each other in the book? They're actually 19 pages apart. And
Yeah.
so, I'm like, well, then I'm saying, well, this isn't my book, so I might have done it this way. But so why did you choose to keep those poems like far apart? Even though it was
Yeah.
actually one day, you know, that 1 day difference, I guess.
Yeah. I think so this was my thinking. Um, a lot can happen in those days. And I think that for that speaker, especially when you're dealing with the sort of things, internally that she was dealing with, um, memories, pieces of the past, all of those things, that's kind of what a day in her brain can look like often. And it's not necessarily chronological. Sometimes it's not perfectly, linear. So that's something that I was kind of thinking about. I did think about putting them back to back, but I had this sort of resistance to it. And I don't know why I had a resistance to that, honestly. But I think that I tried to do it and I just needed there to be some sort of distance. And I think it was because that speaker just needed to breathe. And that's why I chose to do it. But I totally understand what you were saying too. So I think
The important thing is it's not my book, it's yours. And so what I think doesn't necessarily count, but I just thought it was funny.
yeah.
So this talk to me a little bit about the sequencing of this book. I mean, it seems to tell like a distinct story in an order, in spite of
Yeah.
my issues with the those two poems being so. It's like, tell me about the sequencing and just talk about that a little bit and how you decided to kind of go in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that so for the first section, I wanted to start off in the past. So it's kind of giving you this sort of if you followed Scar and Scar off, then you remember all the things that happened before that and that character and that speaker. Because I'm still a fiction writer, there's part of my brain that's like still fiction writery. So I'm just like, how do I tell this story? But also how do I kind of disorient this story at the same time? So I think in Scar and Scar off, I was hyper specific about about a lot of the characters and about a lot of characters in the book, but I think for this one, I tried to be a little bit more vague, just because I wanted to kind of resemble that sort of floating state of being of that internal space anyway. But so yes, back to your question. So I think that I wanted to start off kind of in that sort of energy that Scar and Scarf ended with, kind of like I'm not going to deal with the past. I'm empowered. Look what I've learned from, all of these situations, and I'm coming in, powerful. And then I wanted it to crumble a little bit, and I wanted there to be a little bit of dissonance. So when in Daddy's house, want you to kind of question whether that's actually good advice. So the family starts being introduced to become tigers, and then in Daddy's house, you kind of focus on the father, and then other characters are introduced. Sorry, I'm telling characters, but other feature, other folks in the book are introduced. So I was thinking in terms of who is introduced when they kind of come onto this page. Um, and kind of thematically, I think that when is this speaker dealing with family issues? When are they dealing with sort of interior space? When are they dealing with the second part is obviously kind of the arc is dealing with mental illness. Um, and then that last part, I wanted to kind of incorporate um, just a little bit of each one of those sections. So I think that I wanted there to be kind of a self-reflection. I wanted there to be an empowering poem. I wanted there to be a poem that's kind of going outward and a poem that's kind of familial at the same time. And I wanted to end with a poem that kind of, you know, encapsulates all those things. So that was my thinking. But yeah, that's how I did it.
It's an interesting point that you make about you ask yourself, how do I tell this story? And I think a lot of people who are not familiar with poetry collections, who maybe are just getting into poetry, don't necessarily understand that a lot of collections are thematic and they do tell a story, and it might not be prose necessarily, chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, but there is an arc
Oh
most
yeah.
in these. And I think that's something that's maybe not necessarily widely understood by folks who don't read a lot of poetry, and I think that's a really good point to make. The very last line in this book, it is in a poem called Inevitable, is, but I know no matter what, the next moment comes. A line that you could read so many things into. It's kind of surreal, but kind of just, you know what? Tomorrow's going to happen too, and something is going to happen the next day. So just kind of just scooting back to the sequencing for a second, that poem is the very last poem in the book. Why that one?
Oh yeah. So that was always going to be the last poem in the book. And oh, and as you're thinking about sequencing, I remembered that I also, so sometimes I did this with Scar and Scar Off too. I think about in fiction, we have the Freytag's triangle and all that stuff. So I was thinking about what's going to be the climax of the story that I'm trying to tell through poems. So for me, the climax was either going to be isolation day, isolation room, or wedding day. Um, and I argue that it's isolation room, but I'm sure that you can make an argument that it was wedding day. Um, what was okay? And I forgot the question. What was the question again?
Why this particular poem to
Oh, yes. So I wanted that to kind of resolve a lot of the other pieces of the book that I had been trying to kind of piece together. This character this speaker who is thinking, I'm decided that I want to live, and I've decided that, I want to be alive, alive, alive. So now what? So there's the poem called Why. So okay, I've gone through all these things. I've decided I want to live. Um, so what was the point of going through all of these things? Kind of those existential questions that we ask ourselves. And the kind of answer to a lot of that was at the end of the book that, you know, you'll still see these beautiful things happening, around you. Even if there's a strangeness to them, they'll still continue to happen. You'll still have these connections with your family. These things will still continue to happen for you. And no matter what, they will continue to happen for you because that next moment is going to come. So, I know that it's a person who struggles with a lot of different mental illnesses. Um, when you're in high anxiety, you think that you're just at the end. You just think that you're just, it's all black. Everything's gonna just be done. Um, but that's not the case. That moment's gonna pass. You're gonna move on to the next moment, and that then another moment will happen after that. So it's a pretty simple thing, but it
Mhm.
brought me a lot of brought me a lot of solace. So
Well, that simplicity is just so real though. I mean, it's just like the next moment is going to come, and it's great. Um, I guess I'd like to ask you a little bit about your writing process. Like, are you one of those who has a schedule, who has to write at 9 o'clock every morning at the same desk at the with the same type of coffee or whatever? Or it's like, tell me how these come to you and how you get into your writing thing.
yeah, for this book, I actually wrote it. I wrote it in Columbia, Missouri on the side while I was working on my PhD, but then I wrote it in also Fort Pierce, and I wrote it in Houston. So I wrote it in three different places. Um, but for the most part, I usually wrote between 5 through 7 o'clock. But then sometimes I'd write in the middle of the night. Sometimes I'd write when I was inspired. So it was all over the place. I'd probably say the process was all over the place, and it still is.
It works for you.
It
Um,
still is. Yeah.
by hand or on the computer? Like, do you write in?
I want to be a person who writes on by hand all the time, but I am a computer person, unfortunately. So
Yeah, don't say unfortunately. I mean, it's like I can't do it. I mean, I try, and it's like my first of all, my handwriting's illegible most of the time, but it's like I also edit. Like I'll go back and it's like no, I'm going to change this as it's going. So it's like it's so much easier to do it on the keyboard. So
I feel the
um,
same.
yeah, all right, good. I'm in good company. Um, all right, I alluded, well, I guess before we started, that I had a question to ask you about a poem in your first book, and I didn't really have it formulated, and I still don't, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I think there's a poem, and it's not it's sort of it's called an end in Scar on Scar Off, and it's kind of a prose poem. It's kind of a
Yeah.
flash memoir, I guess.
Mhm.
And just, for people who are not familiar with the poem, the speaker is a caregiver in I guess an older folks home, and she has a special connection with this one particular older gentleman who's on his way out, and he does eventually pass in the poem, and how the speaker deals with it. One of the things that I just found so tender about it, and this may be my question actually, is the speaker is obviously a young person. The other person in the poem is much older, and yet and is also a stranger. It's not a family member.
Mhm.
And yet there's this tenderness between the speaker, and I think she calls him my old man, I think. And it's like, yeah, you know what, the question's still not there. But it's like the generational thing I thought was really striking, and the amount of sympathy that a younger employee, if you want to use that word, can have for a patient, I found astounding. That was based on something that actually happened to you, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So when you were writing that poem and finishing it, in the form it's in now, the did it bring you back to that guy and wondered about those, like his family members and how they were less than stellar, I guess towards the end of his life? And it didn't seem like they were, I don't know, it seemed like the speaker was a little more affectionate towards the older guy than his own family members. Um so I guess I'm saying is like, when you finish that poem, did it kind of bring you back to that moment? And did you want to, like, maybe would you have changed anything between the two people in that poem?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And that's such a just an amazing interpretation of it too. Thank you so much for reading so closely. Um, hmm. So I think that that poem also I wrote, it's kind of a lyric essay. I called it a lyric essay in my mind, but I put it in there, just to be like, it is what you think it is. There's a lot of mind games I was playing with the reader and Scar and Scar. I'm like, what do you
Mhm.
think? I don't care what you think it is. No, I'm just kidding. Um, yes. Wink. Um, but no, I think that that poem, I also wrote it when I was, I wrote it like 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. So I think I'm even in a different place right now than I was when I wrote that. But I think that what I was trying to portray was a certain self-awareness that you don't have the sagacity that somebody else does, but they are looking to you for comfort and solace. And then you think to yourself, what can I possibly give this person? And they are thinking, possibly thinking the same thing with you. So it's kind of this interesting symbiotic sort of relationship. So I think your interpretation was so lovely. So that's something I was trying to capture. And just, I enjoy all types of human relationships. And I just, just random drawing random diverse folks together and seeing what happens is fun. So maybe that's why also a fiction writer. Um, but yeah, so I think that's what I was trying to go for, that sort of, energy between these two kind of unlikely people who were both, feeling as if they were lacking in some area, or they were one felt as if they were dying, so they were too old. The other person was very self-conscious about being young.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's terrific work. Um, Sort of generic poet question. Who are some of your biggest influences, and
Yeah.
why?
Audre Lorde is huge for me. I don't know, just the power behind him. Saying power is kind of because I'm thinking about a poem power, but yes, her power, the power behind her words is fantastic. Maya Angelou, Maya Santos Febres. Um, I like old Walt Whitman, so, but
Yeah, a lot of people do.
why not? Who else? Um, Now I'm just blanking on all of my faves, but yes, definitely Audre Lorde,
Mhm.
um, and Maya Angelou are kind of up there. Um, and I think those are my favorites, but I'll come back with some others. Oh,
Okay.
Jamal Murray, really influenced a lot of this book. So his poetry and his ability to kind of access his vulnerability in ways that I was kind of surprised by that I wasn't able to access myself kind
Mhm.
of inspired me to want to write this book too. Oh, Mary Oliver, I love Mary Oliver.
Oh,
So another one, I'm just like, I know everyone has opinions, but I love them. But but I love
this is
them.
your this is a question about your opinion. It's like, it's like who influenced
Yes,
you?
there you go. Absolutely. So yeah, so I think that I think this book is kind of like if Audre Lorde, very Audre Lorde, Jamal May, and Mary Oliver inspired, kind of. So
Good. How how did this is almost another generic poet question, but I'm really curious because I every time I get to talk to another poet, I'm always fascinated by the answer. Like, how did you like just start writing poems? Like, when did it come to you? It's like, were you little? Were you a teenager? Describe that moment when you actually written a poem and it's like, it's a poem.
yeah. Oh man, there's a couple of moments. So my mom had this big stack of Shakespeare's sonnets, and she said this is poetry, and she had Pablo Neruda's odes, and she said this is poetry, and that was what I knew poetry was. I was like it's either Shakespeare or Pablo Neruda, so that was what I thought when I was very young, like a little kid. So I just read them, and I was like, okay, this is poetry, and I had to memorize, some of Shakespeare's works and all these things. And my mom was she enjoyed just passing down her knowledge to me. So I thought that was poetry, but then I thought to myself, okay, so what if I kind of meld the two things that I enjoy the most, which are music and reading poetry, and I kind of create a sort of poem that sort of has um, a certain wonkiness. That's a terrible word.
That's a great word.
But yeah, so but a sense of intentional dissonance, but a sense of joyfulness at the same time. That's why I meant wonkiness.
Mhm.
But also a sense of music that, one of my tricks to myself is that I'll listen to a song or listen to an instrumental and I'll try to write song lyrics to it, or I'll try to write poems to it and try to match the rhythms just so I can kind of create that rhythm in my mind. So I music just listening to music and reading my mother's poetry when I was a child got me into it. But then I started seeking out poetry on my own, and I started looking for poets that reflected my own experiences as well. Because we were taught the greats in school, but we also weren't. I wasn't exposed to folks that looked like me all the time. So I was like, who are the other poets out there?
Mhm.
Um, so that kind of was my foray into poetry, but it started with a song called Windmills of My Mind by Grady Tate. So I listened to it. It's very old. It's not that old. I mean, I'm saying it's very old. It's not, I'm very old. It's ancient. So it's not, but it's an amazing song and it was written really beautifully. And I thought to myself, I didn't know that you could do this with language, that you could mimic the way the mind moves with language. And I thought, I want to be able to do that the way he does it in a song. I want to be able to do that in a poem or in writing. So then I started getting into stream of consciousness and things like that. And, so anyways, all of those things kind of melded together to form the style that I kind of started kind of finalizing. Mhm.
Awesome. I'm gonna look for that song after after we hang up. I'm gonna check out that song, see if it opens up a whole new world of into your
Well, I
work.
was also 12 when it happened. So
Yeah,
that's probably,
there's
that's
an
probably,
evolution. Yeah.
probably in.
Um, last question. Last question for you. It's so what's next for you? You've got this terrific new book out. What's next on the horizon?
Yeah, so I have well, I'm working on another short story collection, and I have a hybrid collection that is very kind of speculative, which is totally outside of my kind of wheelhouse, but I want to do something new. So I have those two projects that I'm finishing up right now, and I'm working on a novel. So yes.
Wow, that's a
So
lot.
a few things, yes.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Best of luck with all of those, and best of luck with Kinds of Grace, terrific book. And Jennifer Maritza McCauley, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so, so much. I really appreciate it.